Strikes next week, what's the impact going to be?
Well, I think it's a real shame that we're having to call strike action again because the government's offer, which was 5% and £1,500, was nothing to that. Began to even restore the pay erosion and, in fact, would have led to another real terms pay cut. So, unfortunately, we've had to call for another 3 days of strike action, and I'm afraid that there will be some disruption in elective and outpatient care for patients, which I don't think anyone in this country can afford. So I don't understand why the government won't come back to the table and won't put a credible offer to the table.
I want to talk about what a credible offer would look like in a moment, but just to sort of talk in a minute about the impact on patients. You know, we're looking at some of the hospital plans for the strikes, and you often see statements like this one from King's College Hospital in London. You know, to help us safely manage the impact of the strikes, we've taken the decision to postpone the vast majority of non-urgent appointments and procedures. You know, non-urgent makes it sound not so bad, but, you know, these people might have been waiting months, years even, for procedures. Would you like to apologise to them?
Well, I think you make a really good point there in that when hospital leaders say non-urgent, non-urgent might be something like a non-cancer, but it's still really important to each individual patient who has been waiting.
So would you apologise to them?
Often waiting for a really long time. I think what's really important is that the government has failed for over a decade now to produce a credible workforce plan that's going to be able to address outpatient waiting times. And we've seen over the last 10 years, waiting times for appointments go up and up and up. It's the government's responsibility to fund and resource a healthcare system that works for everyone in this country.
I think a lot of people would agree with that, including people who are being impacted by these strikes. But why don't you just apologise to the people who, as you say, will be impacted by the strikes next week?
The strikes don't have to go ahead, though. The government can come to the table and the government can give us a credible offer.
Oh, I promise I will talk to you about a credible pay offer, but would you like to apologise to the people, or is that not something you're happy to do?
I can understand that there's going to be an immense amount of frustration from patients and from our other colleagues when our doctors go on strike this weekend, and it's going to cause an immense source of frustration for everyone. Myself, my family, we all rely on the NHS as well, and the disruption caused is not pleasant for anyone involved. It's a disaster, and it's a disaster that falls primarily at the feet of government.
OK, understood. Now, what is the current state of play then when it comes to talks?
Well, the government actually, they obliterated any sense of good faith in those negotiations when they came out of an offer of 5% and £1,500. This is an offer that's been tabled to all public sector workers. And it just goes to show that Rishi Sunak, who's the man who's leading this decree, doesn't recognise the detail and nuance of each individual industry. He wants to treat us all with a blunt instrument of the same pay offer. And it doesn't recognise the extreme pressures that doctors are under and the extreme pay erosion that doctors have suffered over the last 15 years.
You say that, you know, everyone's got this offer, and you make the argument that actually it's a blunt instrument, that there are specific things about junior doctors. But I guess the counter-argument would be, why are you different from other people in the public sector? Many of them, including people who work for the NHS, who have accepted the offer on the table.
So doctors have suffered now a 31.7% pay erosion. It's increased because Rishi Sunak failed to deliver on keeping inflation down over the year 22-23. And doctors have suffered for so long because we've been operating on a system of goodwill, working under intense pressures in the NHS, not just during the pandemic, but before. And I think it's really, frankly, wrong for this government to continue offering real terms pay cuts, even during this dispute, which is fundamentally about pay restoration.
You say you call the strike because the government's failed to make a credible pay offer. I guess the government would say you've also failed to make a credible pay offer as well, if you like. You know, originally you said you wanted a 35% increase. Some would say that is just never going to happen. What would you accept? So
our pay demand is for full pay restoration so that no doctor is worth less now than they were in 2008, because we've sustained 15 years of pay cuts.
So what would that mean then, in simple terms? What pay rise are you looking for?
Something that reverses our pay erosion for the last 15 years.
So what is that then? What is that number? Is that 35%?
Well, It depends, depending on how many years we want to look over it. And that's something that we're interested in discussing with the government in order to make the one-off cost look smaller. But I noticed
I'm just trying to get to the simple kind of headline here. Forgive me for being slightly bamboozled by the figures, but what is that roughly? I mean, are you talking 10%? Are you talking 35%? What would that look like?
Well, it depends how many years we want to look over.
OK, so how many years do you want to look over then? What would it be?
Well, we're happy to look over a range of years, but we need to be working with governments to understand where their headspace is and what they think is affordable. Now, I think when they say fair and reasonable, then they're not being fair and reasonable. A real terms pay cut this year is further pay erosion. It goes
would a
no
10%
way.
pay rise be fair and reasonable?
No, it wouldn't.
So you need more than 10%?
We would, yes, because our pay erosion has been 31.7% now over 15 years.
So you want more than 30% pay rise?
We would need to structure it over a series of years, and that's something that we'd be happy to do. But I noticed in one of your previous interviews, you yourself even described £1 billion as a rounding error.
Yeah, this was talking about the very good attention to detail. I was talking about Labour's £28 billion green investment, for example. So if you were looking at a Labour government, which we could very well be seeing, would you be happy then if they wouldn't give you a 35% pay rise, but they'd be willing to spend £28 billion on green investment? Is that what you're saying?
So our priorities here are to represent doctors and to be able to restore the pay erosion that doctors have seen. Because as you said at the beginning of our interview, waiting times for appointments are astronomically high. It's not fair or reasonable for patients to be waiting 2 years for outpatient elective activity. And we can only fix that issue if we fix the workforce crisis.
On Thursday, you announced that you're reballoting members to extend your strike mandate beyond August. So how long could these strikes go on for?
Well, we'll be reballoting between the 19th of June and the 31st of August. That will give us an extended 6 months mandate, which will look towards March of 2024. And if we need to, we will reballot again during that period to extend our mandate further.
So you're talking about the first deadline being effectively March next year, but that could be extended if you don't get what you want. You're in this for the long haul.
Our members have given us a clear instruction. They would like us to pursue full pay restoration back to 2008, and that's what we intend to do in our representation of our doctors and our healthcare system.
No matter what the impact is on the NHS and on patients?
The long-term impact on the NHS without a workforce and without doctors as they flee to countries like Canada, Australia and New Zealand is that these waiting lists will increase. We heard from the Royal College of Radiologists recently that there are significant delays to cancer care all year round, not just in winter, all year round, because of a lack of workforce. OK, thank you very much for being on the programme. You've certainly made your points very strongly this morning. Thank you. Thank you.